Hello, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're broadcasting on Channel 9 and WJOPLP Newburyport, FM 96.3. We're also coming to you on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm delighted to welcome today's guest. First off, Beth Wechsler is here to teach us what she knows about psychic research and how it can benefit us. And then I'm delighted to welcome Suzanne Dubus, CEO of the Jeanne Geiger Crisis Center, who's going to talk about a brand new version they've developed for their annual White Ribbon event. But let me introduce you to Beth Wechsler first. Beth Wechsler graduated from Smith College School for Social Work in 1972, and she's been a practicing social worker for almost 50 years. She's presented nationally on psychic events in the lives of clinicians and clients, and she's trained thousands of nurses and social workers in the role of PSI in healthcare. She's particularly interested in the role that psychic events can play in the treatment of grief. Good morning, Beth. Hello and welcome. Mary. Thank you for visiting us on the morning show.
My pleasure, thank you.
What you know about this exciting and fascinating topic. I really appreciate it. Beth, I wanted to start by asking if you would share with us, what's your personal connection to this topic?
Long and intense. I grew up in a family where my father was a student, had studied the works of Edgar Cayce. And so it was the form of religion, if you will, in our Jewish household, was more oriented towards these kind of events. And the understanding of senses that most people don't. So it was just assumed that these things existed.
Yeah, you know, I think I mentioned to you before that my mother was a great fan of Edgar Cayce, who, just to fill people in who may not have heard of him, and please say more about this, was a gifted medium and intuitive, and he was particularly well known for being a healer. He would do a reading for people. Have I summarized him? I probably haven't done him justice.
You got most of it. He was a medical intuitive who had no medical training, but in a trance state, could just be given somebody's name and location and could diagnose and prescribe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this was the context within which you were growing up.
Yeah. That was the context.
It's what my family does. Yeah, that's great.
Well, nobody actually had the gift. There was nobody in my family who I'd say was psychic. And I didn't begin to have any kind of experiences until I was about 40.
Okay.
Any real clear experience till then.
So a little bit of a delayed start, but certainly a sense that this went on in the world around you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, let's clarify at the beginning some things, Beth. So is parapsychology, also known as PSI, is it a scientific study? And if so, who does this type of research and what kinds of phenomena are studied?
Okay. First of all, it is a science. It was deemed a science by the prestigious American Association for the Advancement of Science in, I think, 1968. If I put my glasses on, I could probably tell you. But the history of the research in it goes back to the 1800s in Great Britain, where there was scientific studies done of mediumship. The British Society for Psychic Phenomenon was started in, I'm going to take a quick look here, to the 1870s. 1882 was the start of the British American and the American Society in 1885. And so there was mediumship research going on intercontinental going back to the late 1800s. In 1932, Dr. J.B. Rhine and his wife, Louisa Rhine, who were originally both botanists, started the Parapsychology Research Center at Duke University and did extensive, high-quality, millions of trials of research to study ESP. So they widened the recognition of the term extrasensory perception. The term actually is not PSI, it's psi. It's like in psychology. Well, and here's a really interesting aside, that the word psychology comes from the Greek, which is the word psyche. And it means soul.
Mhm.
So psi means soul, and a lot of what interested me was the way in which modern medicine separated out from any spiritual. As it became more and more scientific, it became less and less spiritual.
Mhm.
And to me, psi has always been the bridge between science and religion.
Oh, that's really interesting, Beth. You put that really well. Yes, I've known that the psyche is the study of soul. And I think it's true often that we lose touch with that. But on the other hand, what's also important and helpful to realize is that there is a long tradition and an intercontinental tradition then of taking these phenomena, these experiences seriously and actually studying them in an evidence-based scientific way.
Yes.
And I think, and a lot of people I think don't know that that type of scientific research exists or how far back it extends. So
Right.
thank you for filling us in on
Oh,
that.
sure.
I think it's really important.
And the current research that I know about is at the Windbridge Institute.
Okay.
And anybody who's interested can Google them. They have studied mediums extensively. Gary Schwartz, who was a Yale psychiatrist or psychologist, I'm not sure actually, but very well regarded, has a book called The Afterlife Experiment. So there's a fair amount of data out there.
Yeah, excellent. Well, along those lines, then, one of the things I wanted to ask you to talk about, Beth, is sometimes, I'm sure you've encountered this, people will dismiss parapsychology or psi as a friend of mine used to call it wooji wooji, as a kind of a flirtation with the occult or the supernatural. And so could you clarify us how the supernatural and the kind of psychic research that you've been interested in, how they're different?
I think it was J.B. Ryan who said there is no supernatural. There is only the natural, which we already understand, and the natural, which we do not yet understand. And that these are phenomena that make many people uncomfortable. And so they'd rather just not look at it, not include it in how they think and feel about the world. That's really different from, so that's fear-based. Then there really is legitimate skepticism, and people should be skeptical. That's a healthy response.
Yeah, skepticism shows that you're trying to make up your mind for yourself based on evidence.
You're trying to keep the information together and make sense of it. Yeah,
But I know that I understand that you also make a distinction between genuine skepticism, which is based on ferreting out the facts and the truth, and what you call pseudoskepticism. And I think that's also an important and a helpful distinction to make. So could you clarify us the difference between skepticism and pseudoskepticism?
Yeah, well, pseudoskepticism on the surface looks like skepticism, but it's really a determination not to believe in it, not to allow evidence and information. And it's a predisposition to just rule it out without listening to all the information that's available.
So it's more closing your mind.
Yes.
Even when the evidence might be there, it's having
it's not a true interest in the evidence. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. And I think that's a helpful and important distinction to make. Well, let's dig in a little bit. Could you please tell us a little bit more about what psychics and mediums actually do, Beth, and how it's different, say, from the passing instance of a feeling of synchronicity or ESP that many of us may have experienced in a transient way. And are there things also that people who are gifted psychics or mediums appear to have in common based on the research?
Okay, we may have to pull me back to some of those sub-questions.
Fair enough.
Psychics and mediums, first of all, a medium is a psychic. So psychic is the broader term. Psychic is the existence of senses beyond the 5 recognized senses. So it's the receiving of information through senses that we don't quite understand yet. Mediums are psychics who tell us they can communicate with the souls of the deceased. Okay. And so if someone has died who you love, and you go to a medium who actually has a real talent, and we'll go back to that in a minute, it's possible that medium can identify the person for you and give you quite a clear sense that she's made a connection to that person, which turns out to be enormously helpful to people who are grieving. It's a kind of reconnection that they feel. So there was this part B of that question. Let me see if you can remind me what it was.
Well, I was wondering, because I think there have been some research done on what people who have these kinds of talents and gifts, genuine gifts, what characteristics they tend to share with one another.
Sure. They're, they call them sensitives for a good reason, that these are people who tend to be more sensitive. It's part of the reason that I'm so interested in its presence in healthcare, because I don't think that you work with people who are in life and death situations and work that intimately with people's health and well-being without having, in many cases, a sensitivity. The original root of the word diagnosis was to be able to see through and between.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, the field is just so rich with those kinds of pieces of information. So yeah, they have that in common. They also often have in common a history of trauma. And that's a more recent insight. And the first psychic who I met, who blew me out of the water, I was 30, I think. And when I after she read for me, I called her up and said, "Can I interview you?" And I went interviewed her for Yankee Magazine. And she said to me she had been the oldest child and had often had to see a step ahead. So it's like, do your senses need to be honed to have precognition? So this life experience, it's very interesting. A lot of people who have these senses will tell you they spent a lot of time in nature as children. Somebody I know who has a lot of this talks about being 4 years old and going into the woods behind her house, and her mother would come out and she'd be sitting there with a chipmunk in her lap. People talk about seeing rings around trees or lights that the rest of us can't see. So I truly believe that this is simply another sense that we don't quite understand, that it's as if you had a very strong sense of smell and nobody else could smell. And you walk into your grandmother's house and you'd say, "Oh, Nana's making apple pie," and the rest of the guests would say, "Woo woo," right? Because they didn't smell it. They didn't, it wasn't coming in for them, And just as, a musician has a more sensitive reaction to sound, a painter to visual. I think it's a gift.
A gift, and also perhaps from what you're saying, something that people can choose to cultivate by a careful observation and attention rather than dismissing things, moving more deeply into perceptions of rings around a tree or an auric field, I guess is what it would be called. So,
and if the environment supports it, because now what's happening is more people, I think, do know that recognize what this is, when they have a child who's like this, they'll go to somebody and try to help the child move into it. Otherwise, the tendency is to shut it down. If I'm seeing something you don't see, I'm just not going to look too closely.
Well, a natural follow-up question, I think, is because people are always interested in psychics and often want to seek one out, especially when people are dealing, I think, with some kind of crisis or problem in their life. And so, Beth, what should people look for to separate out the kind of authentically gifted people that you're describing, who have the gift and have cultivated the gift, from people who are, to put it bluntly, charlatans or opportunists, because they're out there too?
Absolutely, 100%. And it's part of why I'm so interested in people in mental health, particularly having more knowledge about this, because clients who come to you because they're grieving, particularly, are very vulnerable to finding, and Nancy Reagan is a great example of that. After Ronald Reagan was shot, became more and more, we were making national decisions based on Nancy Reagan's psychic.
I remember finding out about that. It was,
So I think it's real important. And the simple answer to the question of how do you tell the difference is one word, and it's specificity.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody can tell you that they see an old man who you loved very much, who is no longer with us, and who is telling her that they continue to hold you in the highest regard. Anybody can do that. We don't need a bit of it.
Yeah.
The really gifted psychics give you much more information. That there's a medium practicing in Massachusetts. Her name is Maureen Hancock. And she doesn't do individual readings anymore. She only does shows. She calls herself the comedian medium. And I've had experiences with her that just completely blew me out of the water. So she'd say things like, when she talked about my father who had passed recently, she said, he's with a dog. It's a setter. Not the red kind, the speckled kind.
Okay.
Okay. And so, all right, that's what I mean by specific. And I will tell you, maybe what she was seeing was the picture of my mother with the setter. I don't know if you can see this. Are you able to?
Yes, I see the setter.
It's the speckled,
the speckled kind.
yes. So that's what I'm saying is the really gifted. And again, it's a great analysis which said, you look at somebody like a great basketball player, and you say, well, so what percentage of the shots that he takes does he make?
Yeah.
And the answer is that on a really good night, a really talented player might make 60% of his shots. He's not going to make them all.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with a medium can be very talented and not hit every shot. But Maureen will do things like that, or she'll do things like she picked up one day a summer house, and my grandparents had a summer house on the Cape, and she said, it's like the 4th of July, and they're going in and out of this house, and I see the letter C. And well, my grandmother's name was Clara.
Okay.
And then she says she's with the R person. Well, there were 3 houses. There were Clara's house and Ruth's house and Marion's house. So she didn't pick up Marion, but she got Clara.
So that kind of specificity is a sign that somebody's really tuning into something that's not generic.
Correct.
It has to do with you.
I've seen her do things like she's very, spends a lot of time reading for people who have lost children. And I sometimes have sent or gone with grieving clients to her shows in the hope that she'll come to them. And she, most of the times I've done it, she has. But she'll tell them the cause of the death.
Interesting. Yeah.
She can tell them how the person died, and she can tell them things that happened at the wake. And so the question that's always asked is, well, is she reading them telepathically? Is she really communicating with somebody who's not here? And mediums will tell you they're not reading you. They're hearing a voice. And what you'll see with Maureen often is she'll go like this, because she's hearing so much. There's so much coming in that she's trying to get control of it.
So she puts her hands over her ears, literally, to kind of block that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, not for nothing, though. Also, Beth, even if she were telepathically reading somebody, that's pretty amazing on its own. So anyway, she sounds fascinating. And again,
but it is different if you're grieving.
Yeah.
What you want is a reconnection with the person you lost.
Of course, the sense that there's something that that someone is, in whatever transformed way, still there.
Yes. Well, and the man who founded the Waldorf School, Rudolf Steiner, believed that the dead wanted to co-create with us.
What an interesting phrase.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, really interesting. And a medium would be a vehicle to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about grieving and death, and life's eternal mystery, Beth, is that it ends in death, seemingly, and whether death is a final void or whether it is a transformation of some kind. And that's an area where parapsychology is often pursued to find answers. So I was wondering if you could give a sense of where things stand these days in the study of near-death experiences.
I am not currently, up on the literature.
Mhm.
I think there've been many, many reports of it, and observations of it. I don't think we know anything for a fact yet, except this is what they do know for sure, that people who have had these experiences to a very high degree report no further fear of death.
Yes, yeah, yeah, I've
That they
read
have
that is.
seen or
Yeah.
touched something
Mhm.
that has made them feel like, this is
Yeah.
not the end. This is
Mhm.
not nothing I'm going to live in fear of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there is a lot of active research ongoing of that field after I think Raymond Moody got it started, and Kenneth Ring and many others have followed up on it. Um, now, what about uh, apparitions or people appearing to people in some form after death?
Yeah,
Are you conversant with whether that's being studied, or because I know that
I'm
happens
not,
very
I
commonly?
don't know where things are currently with it. I do know that it is actually the majority of widows and widowers will report some sense of an apparition or a visit.
Yeah,
And it could be olfactory, it can be auditory, it can be, but they report the sense of a presence.
yeah. After my father died, I had a brief apparition, I guess you'd call it. It was more like a hologram of him. I'd been staying overnight in my parents' house in the room that used to be his, and it was very pleasant. It was like, "Hi, Dad," and I know those things only happened once. Never happened with my mom, but it was just this kind of. It was his energy, I guess that's the way I would put it.
Can I just,
His
out of
energy was there.
curiosity, ask you his first name?
Cleve.
Cleve.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Very sweet man.
Uh-huh.
And so it was just very appealing. It only happened that once. It wasn't scary in the slightest. And it was a surprise. I kind of woke up out of sleep and
Uh-huh.
oh, so,
Yeah, look
and I
who's
know that
here.
those are very common kinds of experiences,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and reassuring. And we're going to talk
Very
more
reassuring.
about some of the
Yeah.
reassurance of some of these type of experiences in a minute. Um, so, Beth, in an article that you wrote about your work with presenting this research to healthcare providers, you've written about a sea change in the field of grief therapy, trending away from seeing grief as a move. You want to move people toward final closure and unburdening them of their mourning, and kind of cutting the connection with the deceased so that they can resume life without grieving. And in this sea change, instead, people are moving toward wanting to cultivate a different and a continuing bond with the person that you've lost, with someone who's no longer here. And I was hoping, I find this so intriguing. I think the phrase is connecting bonds or continuing bonds. And could you explain this shift and the importance and benefits of this concept of continuing bonds?
I think basically when we love someone, we don't want to let go of them. We don't want that love to end.
Yeah.
And that if we can help people find a way to go on living and still maintain that attachment and connection, that they're much happier.
Yeah.
And then again, a medium gives you, okay, they are there,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was a couple of minutes ago when you were talking, I was recalling when you were talking about your father, about 12 or 13 years ago, I was living in Massachusetts, and my parents, who were in their late 80s, were living in Florida. And at that point, I would talk to them every evening, briefly. And I talked to them, everything was fine. And I went to sleep that night, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was like hurled out of sleep. I was 1 minute I was asleep, the next minute I was awake. It wasn't a dream. And I sat up in bed and I thought, oh my God, my father is gone.
Oh.
And I looked at the clock and it was 2 a.m. So the phone didn't ring. I wasn't going to call them at 2 a.m. And I went back to sleep. Next morning, no call, everything was fine. And that was the end of it. Until about 3 weeks later, my father got on the phone and he said, come get us. And I said, okay, sure, why? And he said, when I was sick, meaning he had had a urinary tract infection when that event happened. He'd just been started on an antibiotic. He said, when I was sick, I was out of my body. I said, you mean about 3 weeks ago at 2 o'clock?
Oh my gosh.
So, what can I say? There's something going on, to minimize it, to say it didn't happen is to not be willing to look at it.
Yeah. There's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than is dreamt of in your philosophy, as Hamlet famously said.
Who's that quote from?
It's from Hamlet.
From Hamlet. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Do you have other examples of after-death communication, or ADCs, I think as they're called, Beth?
In my own, there's a million of them out there. My own experience was the first time that I had one of a really clear psychic experience. I had just had a second child, so I had a 2.5, 3-year-old and a baby, and I was going up to Boston for the day and I was going to go see my obstetrician, and I had a sitter coming, and I was going to have the whole day, and I was sort of looking forward to it. But I had a great aunt, Ruth, who I just mentioned to you, who was the youngest of my grandmother's sisters, and she had had a stroke and she was living in Brookline. And I sat down on the foot of my bed and I'm thinking, well, I could go to the doctor and then I could go up to Loman's shopping. And then I thought, well, would it be like doing something for Nanny if I went to see Aunt Ruth? And I heard, as clear as day, a voice inside my head, highly annoyed. And the voice said, go see my sister. And I thought, oh, that's really weird. That was my first real event of this sort. And so I did go see my aunt, and we had a very nice visit. And within a couple of weeks of that visit, she had another stroke and was never able to speak again. So it was literally my last chance to talk to her, or to talk to me. And so I think if we're open, we have these experiences. I have a dear friend who has no interest in this at all, absolutely just doesn't fit into his framework of reality. And his wife died, this was years ago. And some months afterwards, he said, something happened the day Ellen died that I haven't really wanted to mention it to you. I'm like, yeah. And what happened? And, well, the hospice nurse was there and she declared the time of death, and the time of death with the same numbers as her date of birth and of our daughter's birthday. And then he said, well, what do you think that means? And being a trained social worker, I said, what do you think that means? And he said, well, I don't believe in these things. And that was the end of it. And that gets back. It wasn't the rigidity in his thinking was such that he could see it. He was too smart not to see it, but he wasn't going to let it in. And so then I answered it, and I'm not sure that this is just what I think it means. To me, it means completion, beginning and end, everything complete. And that, it's sort of like you're getting information from the universe that this was her life, and it's okay. Okay.
In addition to completion, that kind of the profound interconnection, mind to mind is what it makes me think of. Absolutely. There's another story. You reminded me of it when we were talking on the phone, getting ready for this. Could you remind us of the story about Paul McCartney and his dream of his mother?
Excuse me. Is it Paul McCartney? I was having the same issue of who it's Bridge Over Troubled Waters.
No, I think it's Let It Be.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is right. It is Paul McCartney. It is
Yeah.
Let It Be. Just give me 1 second here.
Oh, sure.
So the lyrics of the song are, when I find myself in times of trouble,
Mhm.
Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And what he's writing about is that after his mother Mary died,
Mhm.
he was in a very bad place in his life. And he had that experience of an apparition of her just saying, Paul, let it be.
Yeah.
And he wrote the song from that.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful song. And so we've all benefited from that.
Yeah.
The dream transmission of an after-death communication.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, I know that you've done a lot of reflecting upon the value of after-death communications for people who are grieving. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what you see as the primary benefit of this type of after-death communication for people.
I've just, I've watched people go through it and I've seen it. It just gives them a tremendous sense of continued connection.
Yeah.
That the person is gone from the here and now, gone from their daily life,
Yeah.
but that bond, that real love between them is alive and well.
Yeah.
And I think it helps people move on. I think if we can sort of tuck the deceased in with us and then go forward instead of standing at the grave,
Yeah. And feeling totally cut off. And
Yeah. I said, my father used to say to me, don't go to the grave, they're not there.
Yeah, well, and a student of Edward Casey that he was, that he would know. Somebody recently said to me, I forget who it was, but it summed something up that I thought was simple, but it's profound. They said that, people die, but love doesn't. And so that's what you're describing, that we have some way to continue investing our love.
Yes.
I think is something that we need.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it feels like something has been cut off from you.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, to sum up a little bit, then this has been fascinating and so much fun. Where does psychic research stand today? What's hot in the field, or where's it being done? You mentioned, I think, Windridge earlier.
Yeah, the Windridge Institute.
Windridge.
Yeah.
And just anything else you can fill us in on where things stand today or where you think things are headed?
There's Alan Botkin's work on induced after-death communication, which was actually a result of some work he was doing as a psychologist at a veterans hospital. But the truth is, I am not up to date in the field. I have gone off in other directions. And so while I maintain my fascination with it, I'm not really coming.
Yeah. But that is just that's you had written about that in the article that I know you wrote sometime. But just the idea that working with people, especially people who've encountered a traumatic death, I think, to help them use this kind of induction technique in order to induce an after-death communication has proved to be, you were just quite eloquent about this, very healing for people, and helps them resolve particularly a complicated grief, let's say, or one that they feel haunted by. So, one of the thing you close your article with, and I'm going to ask you to close this interview for us today, is, because I love this, I hadn't seen it before, but you mentioned a quotation from Jonas Salk about the 3 stages of knowledge. So Beth, would you be willing to share?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
So what he said was that the first stage of knowledge is it can't be true. And then the second is it's true, but it isn't important.
Mhm.
And the third is we've known it all along. And of course, if you look to indigenous populations, they've known it all along.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you, Mary. This was great fun.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's been wonderful to talk to you. I really appreciate your sharing your knowledge and your perspectives with us. I
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. Thank you so much. You take
Okay.
care now.
You
All
too.
right. Farewell. And now I'm so happy to welcome Suzanne Dubus to the show. She's the CEO of the Jeanne Geiger Crisis Center, and she's here to talk about the new plans for their White Ribbon event this year, a brand new version of the White Ribbon event. So Suzanne, welcome. And as ever, thank you so much for visiting the morning show.
Good morning, Mary. It's really so nice to be here on this beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. It's spring.
Yes.
So, well, Suzanne, we're going to talk about the creative plans. As I mentioned, that the Geiger Center has launched for a different version of, but this is the 9th annual White Ribbon event. But perhaps you'd start us off by reminding us all of how this campaign was initially launched 30 years ago.
Thank you. That is an awesome place to start and a sad reminder. So in 1991, after there was a slaying, not unlike the one that happened in Colorado last night, where a man went into a classroom at the university and killed 14 women. And so there were so many Canadian men who were just outraged and decided they needed to take action. So they started the White Ribbon campaign to urge men to speak out against violence against women and really become allies. So today, the White Ribbon campaign, it's a worldwide campaign. It's in 60 countries. They've collected well over 5 million signatures, and it's growing. And that's a really key piece of the White Ribbon campaign, is asking men to step up and pledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important and important to remember. I remember how shocking that event was in
Me
Canada when it
too.
first happened. It was like beyond imagination, and what a wonderful outcome, though, of a tragic event to have men and boys step up
Yes.
and take responsibility and to initiate this campaign. So thanks for that reminder of that.
Well, yeah, I was just say thank you for reminding me too, because that was a pivotal moment, and you're reminding me how pivotal it was for me as well.
yeah.
And it was really the first time we heard about a mass killing with guns and all of that, and so it's really tragic.
It really was, yeah. So, well, could you also talk about the new layers of meaning and importance that the pandemic, whose anniversary is here and slightly past, I guess, has given to the urgent need for gender equality and ending violence against women?
Well, it's such an excellent question. I have to tell you, if you had told me a year ago that we would have been taking giant steps backward with gender equality, I would not have believed it, because I felt like, despite, there was a lot of disruption, but I felt like that there were lots of steps forward. It is very disheartening to know that women's jobs are so vulnerable to this crisis in a way that men's jobs haven't been. And it's not that I want men to lose their jobs, but in December alone, women lost 156,000 jobs.
Wow.
And part of that is because somebody has to stay home with the kids while they are learning, or their jobs are being phased out, or businesses are closing. It's another heartbreaking thing as you drive through downtowns and see stores, shuttered up, and really, so hoping that this doesn't have an impact much longer. And those impacts are compounded for women who are suffering domestic violence. You add that financial insecurity, it can feel very, very hopeless.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just underscores the vulnerability that has been there all along, and that with the continuing quest, we have to be relentless.
That's right. That's
We
right.
just have to be focused and relentless, as you and the Geiger Center always are. Thank you for that. So
you are welcome.
Well, sadly, in the news this week, and I just wanted to get your take on it. We're all still reeling from the really horrifying slayings in Atlanta of women of Asian descent, and also more broadly the uptick in the last year assaults and harassment of Americans of Asian descent, most of which have been on women. Fully 2/3 of them have been on women, and shamefully, frequently, elderly women.
Elderly, yes.
So
yes.
what do these horrifying events underscore for us about what needs to be done still to make everybody safe?
Well, for me, when I think about, so it was a horrible incident, and I think was a, capping off this months-long campaign against anyone of Asian descent.
Yeah.
But I think in order to end gender-based violence, we've got to address racism, white supremacy, xenophobia. They're all connected. And our work relies on us understanding that and addressing this intersectionality and trying to always make sure that people understand they're not unrelated. And in order to end domestic violence, we have to address racism, xenophobia, and white supremacy. And, I was also really disheartened when I first heard that there was this kind of almost a pass for this guy. There were some not justifications. That's probably too strong of a word, but it felt like until some people started to respond quickly and passionately against that, it felt like, hey, we're going to just let this go. And these people don't matter. And they do matter. Every single one of us matters.
Who had the worst day? Clearly the people who got murdered and their families and loved ones who survived. So yeah, that was disturbing. But there has been happily lots and lots of pushback, although it did take a surprising amount of time for the pushback and maybe it was happening and it didn't get the attention, but at least it finally did happen. And I love the point that you make about the convergence of all of these different forms of hatred and discrimination, because I think when we are fully understanding of how interconnected all these forms of violence are, we can join hands, everybody.
Yes,
There is power in numbers.
Yes.
And so thank you for pointing that out. I think that is a really helpful and hopeful lesson.
Well, and I think, I'm sorry, I just have one more point. And so when you think about a victim of domestic violence who's also, let's just in this case say Asian, who's losing their job, who is afraid of white people and afraid that the systems that we've built for justice aren't going to respond to them. You can see why so many people stay in the shadows. And, our work is really about shining a light on those shadows and inviting them in. Yeah.
Well, you can never have too much sunshine, right? The best disinfectant in the world. So, well, talking of sunshine and things that bring light to the world, let's talk about the brand new forum that the White Ribbon event will take this year and how you all came up with the idea.
Well, I think we came up with the idea because we are so tired of Zoom. We're all zoomed out. When I say we, it's a capital W, capital E. Like, I know this is where people are most of their days. And so when the event people said, hey, how about we just do a series of videos and people can tune in as they wish, they can tune out as they wish. We will make this, warm and inviting. And we have a whole bunch of videos. We have staff. I think I was the kickoff yesterday. So the videos are going to show every day from March 22nd until April 2nd or 3rd, I think.
Great.
And so it's staff, it's board members, it's donors. We have students and community members really talking about the value of the youth prevention work in the schools and about, if we're talking about engaging men and boys as allies, this is the place we need to start, is to help support healthy ideas about who they are and how they want to be as men. And so anyhow, videos every day. They're only five minutes, I think.
Bite size.
Yes, bite size.
I think I was reading that there will also be some social media contests and campaigns. What can you tell us about those?
Well, we know everybody's suffering, but we also know restaurants are particularly suffering. So we have these campaigns on Facebook and Instagram And basically it's like, tell us what your favorite restaurant is. And then every day we're going to be picking someone to get a gift card to that restaurant, to their restaurant of their choice. And so it's part of us wanting to really give back to restaurants as well, because they have always been so generous to us, and we want to help lift them up as well.
That's a wonderful convergence of good.
Yeah.
It strikes me. And yeah, I think the pandemic has shown us all how much restaurants meant to us. We might not have thought about it before, but certainly their absence has shown us how much we miss being able to go out to a public place and the watering holes.
Absolutely. And you never imagined a year ago that they wouldn't be here.
I know, and for so long. So
Right.
that sounds like a wonderful idea. Well, Suzanne, please tell us then how proceeds from the event will be used in support of your goals.
So like last year, before last year, 100% of the proceeds always went to the youth prevention programs, but the needs of survivors are greater now. And so we're kind of splitting the priorities. So the funds raised for the White Ribbon Campaign this year will, yes, help fund the youth empowerment programs that we are hoping will start up in person, as robust as they were before the pandemic in the fall. And then the second thing is, because the need is greater for survivors right now, there are so many financial needs and housing needs and safety planning and legal services. So part of the proceeds will also go to help survivors.
Wonderful, wonderful. Glad to hear that. Well, finally, and most importantly, how can people sign up to receive the videos?
If you're not already on our email list, you can go to our website, which is www.jeannegeiger.org, and sign up to receive one of our newsletters, and then you will automatically start to get these videos. You can also look at the videos on our website and Facebook and social and Instagram pages.
So easy to access, everybody.
Very easy, very easy. We're trying to make it as easy as possible.
Wonderful. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much at so many levels. Thank you for visiting the morning show. Thank you at a larger level for all the work that you do and for making the connections that you make. And really, let's shine the light and let's join hands together to create just a safer, healthier world for all. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for visiting the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. Well, that's it for this week's show, everybody. Thanks for watching. Please join us next week, Thursday at 9 on Channel 9 for the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show. Just go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8, and then the following Tuesday at 4 and Wednesday at 3 p.m. and will be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org and click on the cloud icon. That's it for today, everybody. Farewell. Farewell.